My name is Lillian Porter. I'm 37 years old, and while standing at my mother's funeral service, wearing a hand-tailored morning dress from my luxury fashion label's latest collection, a piece that had taken 3 master seamstresses over 200 hours to create using rare Italian silk crepe and hand-finished details that reflected both traditional morning wear and contemporary design aesthetics, my cousin Vanessa loudly sneered, "Nice bargain dress, Lillian. Did you find that at a discount store?" I guess not everyone can afford proper funeral attire, while extended family members giggled at her mockery of my supposedly inferior fashion sense. What Vanessa didn't know was that the bargain dress she was mocking had a retail value of $1,500, that I had secretly founded and owned the prestigious luxury fashion house where she worked as a public relations manager for the past 5 years, and that her human resources department had already prepared her termination letter for cause before the funeral reception even ended, since employees who publicly insult the company founder at family funerals create liability issues that require immediate dismissal, regardless of their position or tenure. The luxury fashion label that would become the center of my family's most devastating revelation had begun 12 years earlier as an experiment in combining traditional European couture techniques with sustainable manufacturing practices and contemporary design sensibilities that would appeal to clients who valued both artistic craftsmanship and ethical production methods in their luxury clothing purchases. I want to create fashion that respects both the artisans who make it and the clients who wear it, I had told my business partner and lead designer Marcus during our initial planning meetings for what would become Porter & Associates Atelier, a name that deliberately obscured my family connection while establishing the company's focus on collaborative artistic excellence rather than celebrity designer branding. The decision to maintain anonymous ownership through a holding company structure had been both strategically calculated to protect my privacy and artistically meaningful for establishing a brand identity based on quality and craftsmanship rather than founder personality, but it had also created the ironic situation where my own family members would dismiss my business success while praising Vanessa's impressive corporate position at a company I had built from nothing. Porter & Associates focuses on creating timeless pieces that transcend seasonal trends. Our brand messaging emphasized during the early years when we were establishing market positioning and building relationships with luxury retailers who would carry our collections. Each garment represents hundreds of hours of skilled craftsmanship, using the finest materials sourced from ethical suppliers worldwide. The brand philosophy that emphasized quality over quantity and craftsmanship over trends had resonated strongly with affluent clients who were increasingly interested in sustainable luxury and investment pieces that would remain relevant for decades rather than following fast fashion cycles that created environmental waste and exploitative labor practices. "Your atelier's work is extraordinary," luxury fashion editors had written during our breakthrough years when major publications began featuring our designs. The technical execution rivals haute couture houses, while the sustainable production methods establish new standards for ethical luxury manufacturing. Porter & Associates represents the future of responsible high-end fashion. The critical recognition from fashion industry authorities had translated into commercial success that exceeded my most optimistic projections, with annual revenues growing from $800,000 in our first year to over $47 million by our 10th anniversary, while maintaining profit margins that reflected our premium positioning and our commitment to paying artisans fairly for their skilled labor. But while I was building a fashion empire that employed over 120 people and dressed celebrities, executives, and discerning clients who valued quality craftsmanship, my family had continued to view my work as just running a small business that couldn't compare to Vanessa's supposedly impressive corporate career in public relations. "Lillian runs some kind of clothing business," my late mother Barbara would explain to relatives when they asked about my professional life. "It's nice that she's self-employed, but Vanessa has a real corporate position with a prestigious fashion label. Vanessa's career is much more established and impressive than Lillian's entrepreneurial efforts." The characterization of my fashion empire as some kind of clothing business, while praising Vanessa's public relations position, was both factually inaccurate and emotionally painful, since my mother's approval had always been conditional on meeting her narrow definitions of professional success. that valued corporate employment over entrepreneurial achievement. Vanessa works for Porter and Associates Atelier. Barbara would continue with obvious pride about her niece's career trajectory. It's one of the most exclusive luxury fashion brands in the country. She manages their public relations and works with celebrities and fashion magazines. She's really made something of herself. The irony of my mother praising Vanessa for working at a company I had founded while dismissing my own business as less impressive was both personally devastating and professionally revealing about how effectively I had maintained anonymous ownership through corporate structures that protected my privacy while allowing the brand to develop its own identity, separate from founder personality. "Lillian, you should ask Vanessa for career advice," Barbara had suggested during family gatherings. "She understands the fashion industry in ways that might help you grow your little clothing business. Maybe she could give you some tips about how to be more successful." The suggestion that I should seek career advice from someone whose salary I was ultimately responsible for paying was both absurd and typical of how my mother had always valued Vanessa's corporate position over my entrepreneurial success, never understanding that I had built the company that employed her favored niece. Have you ever been dismissed by family members who praised someone else for working at a company you secretly founded and owned? That's exactly what I experienced for years, as Vanessa received recognition for representing a brand I had created while my own business achievements were minimized and dismissed as less impressive than her corporate employment. The family dynamics that had made Vanessa's funeral mockery possible had developed over decades through subtle but consistent messaging about whose career success deserved recognition and whose achievements were merely acceptable but unremarkable compared to the family's truly impressive members. "Vanessa has always been the smart one," extended family members would say during gatherings where career achievements were discussed. "Getting that position at Porter and Associates shows real business acumen and professional development. She's made the Porter name proud in the fashion industry." The characterization of Vanessa's employment at my company as evidence of her business acumen, while my founding of that company was dismissed as less impressive, was both logically absurd and emotionally consistent with family patterns that had always favored Vanessa over me in assessments of professional success and personal achievement. "Lillian works hard, but Vanessa works smart," Uncle Richard would add when comparing our careers. "There's a difference between running a small business and having a prestigious corporate position at an internationally recognized luxury brand. Vanessa chose the path that leads to real success." The distinction between working hard and working smart, while suggesting that corporate employment was inherently superior to entrepreneurship, revealed the limited understanding that family members had about business ownership and wealth creation, preferring the appearance of corporate prestige over the reality of entrepreneurial success. "Vanessa gets to work with celebrities and fashion editors," cousins would say with obvious envy about her public relations responsibilities. "She attends fashion shows and industry events. Her Instagram is full of photos with famous people and luxury fashion content. That's the kind of career success everyone dreams about." The focus on Vanessa's access to celebrity culture and fashion events while ignoring the business acumen required to build the company that employed her was typical of how family members assessed career success based on visible glamour rather than substantive achievement or financial results. But while my family was celebrating Vanessa's corporate position and dismissing my entrepreneurial work, I was also maintaining strict boundaries about revealing my ownership of Porter and Associates, partly to protect my privacy and partly to ensure that the brand's success was based on quality rather than family connections or founder publicity. No founder interviews, no personal profiles, no social media presence tied to the company, I had told Marcus when establishing our media policies. The brand should speak for itself through the quality of our work, not through promoting my personal story or leveraging my identity as the founder. The commitment to anonymous ownership had been both strategically valuable for building a brand identity, separate from founder personality, and personally protective for maintaining privacy that allowed me to separate my business success from my family relationships. But it had also created the situation where Vanessa could work for my company while remaining completely unaware that her younger cousin owned the business she represented. Porter and Associates maintains founder privacy as a core principle. Our corporate communications policy stated in response to media requests for founder information. The brand's identity is built on collaborative excellence rather than individual personality, and we believe our work should be evaluated on its own merits, rather than through founder celebrity. The corporate policy that protected my anonymity had been respected by fashion media and industry professionals who understood that some luxury brands preferred to emphasize product quality over founder personality. But it had also meant that Vanessa could spend 5 years working for my company without ever suspecting that the cousin she dismissed as running a small clothing business was actually the founder and owner of her employer. "I love working for Porter & Associates," Vanessa would tell family members during gatherings. "The company has such a prestigious reputation, and being part of their public relations team means working with the absolute best in luxury fashion. It's the kind of career opportunity that Lillian probably dreams about, but will never achieve with her little business." The comparison between her employment at my company and my supposedly inferior entrepreneurial work was both personally insulting and ironically revealing about how completely she misunderstood the power dynamics in our professional relationship, since I could have terminated her employment at any time through directing HR to evaluate her performance and professional conduct. But while Vanessa was building her career on my company's reputation without knowing I owned it, she was also developing increasingly condescending attitudes about my fashion sense and business acumen that would culminate in her devastating mockery at my mother's funeral. "Lillian, where do you buy your clothes?" Vanessa would ask during family gatherings with obvious criticism of my wardrobe choices. "You should really invest in quality pieces instead of whatever discount items you're wearing. I could give you styling advice if you're interested in improving your fashion sense." The suggestions that I needed fashion advice from someone who worked in public relations at my own fashion house were both amusing and insulting, since my wardrobe consisted entirely of pieces from Porter & Associates collections or custom designs from other luxury labels whose founders I knew personally through industry relationships. "Those shoes look cheap," Vanessa had commented during one family dinner while examining my handmade Italian leather boots that had cost $2,400 and were custom-sized for my feet. "If you worked in fashion like I do, you'd understand the importance of quality footwear. These look like something from a discount store." The assessment of my custom luxury footwear as cheap and discount, while suggesting she understood quality better because of her public relations position, was typical of how Vanessa had developed an inflated sense of her fashion expertise based on her corporate employment at a company whose product quality I had personally established through years of developing relationships with artisan manufacturers. "Lillian just doesn't have an eye for fashion," Vanessa would tell cousins while discussing our respective wardrobes. "She wears these bizarre pieces that don't match current trends. I try to give her advice, but she doesn't understand style the way someone who works in the luxury fashion industry does." The characterization of my wearing bizarre pieces that didn't match trends was actually recognition that I wore investment fashion designed to transcend seasonal cycles rather than following fast fashion trends. But Vanessa interpreted my wearing timeless pieces as evidence of poor fashion sense, rather than understanding it reflected sophisticated approach to wardrobe building. But the condescension that Vanessa had been directing at my fashion choices for years would reach its devastating peak at my mother's funeral, when she would publicly mock my mourning attire in front of grieving family members, not knowing she was insulting a piece from her own employer's most exclusive collection, while also creating the documented misconduct that would justify her immediate termination. The funeral that would become the setting for the most dramatic revelation in my family's history began on a gray October morning when we gathered to say goodbye to Barbara, whose declining health over the previous 6 months had given us time to prepare for her passing, but hadn't diminished the grief of losing the woman who had shaped our family dynamics through decades of subtle favoritism and calculated praise distribution. "Mom would have wanted us all to be together today," I had told cousins during the receiving line before the service, trying to focus on shared grief rather than the family tensions that had characterized our relationships for years. Whatever our differences, we're united in mourning someone who meant so much to all of us. The attempt to emphasize family unity during shared loss was both emotionally genuine and strategically naive, since I hadn't anticipated that Vanessa would use my mother's funeral as an opportunity to publicly mock my fashion choices in front of relatives who would view her criticism as amusing entertainment rather than recognizing it as inappropriate behavior during a sacred family moment. "Lillian, I need to ask about that dress," Vanessa had announced loudly during the gathering before the service, her voice carrying across the funeral home's reception area, where relatives were greeting each other and sharing memories of Barbara. "Where exactly did you find that outfit? It looks like something from a clearance rack at a discount store." The public mockery of my mourning attire in front of grieving family members was both personally devastating and professionally revealing about Vanessa's character, since she was using my mother's funeral as an opportunity to reinforce family hierarchies about who had superior fashion sense, rather than showing respect for the solemn occasion. "I mean, I know you run that small clothing business and probably can't afford quality funeral attire," Vanessa continued with obvious enjoyment of her public performance. "But surely you could have borrowed something appropriate instead of wearing whatever bargain outfit that is. It's embarrassing for the family when you show up looking like you shopped at a discount store." The suggestion that I couldn't afford quality funeral attire while wearing a $31,500 mourning dress from my own luxury fashion house's most exclusive collection was both factually absurd and emotionally cruel, demonstrating Vanessa's willingness to use family tragedy as an opportunity for establishing her supposed superiority in fashion expertise and professional success. "Vanessa's right. That dress does look cheap," Cousin Jennifer added with giggles that suggested she viewed my mother's funeral as entertainment, rather than recognizing the inappropriateness of mocking someone's attire during family bereavement. "You should really ask Vanessa for fashion advice. She works for that amazing luxury brand and actually understands quality clothing." The agreement with Vanessa's mockery while suggesting I needed fashion advice from someone who worked at my own company was creating a chorus of family criticism during my mother's funeral service, transforming what should have been a moment of shared grief into an opportunity for publicly establishing that I was the family member with inferior fashion sense and unsuccessful business career. "I try to help Lillian understand fashion," Vanessa said with false generosity about her supposed attempts to educate me. "But she just doesn't have natural style sense like some people do. Working in luxury fashion has taught me to recognize quality, and that dress is definitely not quality. It's probably polyester or some cheap fabric trying to look like silk." The assessment that my dress was probably polyester, when it was actually hand-finished Italian silk crepe that cost over $800 per yard, was both technically wrong and professionally ironic, since Vanessa's supposed expertise from working in luxury fashion hadn't taught her to recognize the quality of pieces from her own employer's collection. Have you ever been mocked for wearing cheap clothing at a funeral while actually wearing a piece worth more than most people's monthly salary, created by artisans whose wages you personally ensured were fair? That's exactly what I was experiencing as Vanessa used my mother's funeral as an opportunity to publicly establish her supposed superiority, while family members joined in ridiculing my fashion sense. "The fabric does look synthetic," Uncle Richard agreed, while examining my dress from across the room. "Vanessa has such a good eye for quality. She's right that Lillian should invest in better pieces for important occasions like funerals. This is embarrassing for the Porter family name." The concern about my attire being embarrassing for the Porter family name, while wearing a piece that literally bore my family name as part of the brand identity, was creating layers of irony that were both personally amusing and emotionally painful, since my family was criticizing me for supposedly damaging the family reputation, while praising someone whose career depended entirely on my business success. "I offered to lend Lillian something appropriate from my wardrobe," Vanessa told relatives with false concern about my supposed fashion emergency. "But she insisted on wearing that discount store dress. I guess some people just don't understand the importance of proper presentation during significant family events." The characterization of my carefully chosen mourning attire as a discount store dress that demonstrated my failure to understand proper presentation was reaching levels of public humiliation that were creating documented misconduct serious enough to justify immediate employment termination, since Vanessa was using family tragedy to mock someone who would soon be revealed as her employer and company founder. "At least Vanessa understands how to dress for a funeral," Aunt Margaret said while comparing our respective outfits. "Working for that prestigious fashion house has obviously taught her about appropriate clothing for different occasions." Lillian could learn a lot from Vanessa's professional expertise. The suggestion that I needed to learn from Vanessa's professional expertise, while she worked for a company whose design philosophy and quality standards I had personally established, was creating a family consensus that my fashion sense was inferior to Vanessa's supposed expertise, setting up the dramatic revelation that would transform their mockery into devastating recognition of how completely they had misunderstood the power dynamics in our family. But while Vanessa was enjoying her public mockery of my funeral attire, I was also making calculations about how to respond to this humiliation in ways that would permanently establish accurate understanding of who held power in our family and professional relationships. Vanessa has crossed a line, I thought while listening to continued jokes about my supposedly cheap funeral dress. Using my mother's funeral to mock my fashion choices while working for my company, and depending on my business success for her career, creates liability issues that justify immediate termination, regardless of her tenure or position. The recognition that Vanessa's funeral mockery had created both personal betrayal and professional misconduct was transforming my grief about my mother's passing into cold calculation about appropriate consequences for an employee who had publicly insulted the company founder during family bereavement. "This ends today," I decided while watching Vanessa continue to entertain relatives with jokes about my supposedly inferior fashion sense. After the service, she's going to learn exactly who owns the company she's so proud of working for, and she's going to discover that insulting the founder at a funeral has immediate career consequences. The decision to reveal my ownership of Porter & Associates and terminate Vanessa's employment was both personally satisfying and professionally appropriate, since her public mockery at a funeral had demonstrated character issues and judgment failures that made her unsuitable for continuing to represent my company in any capacity. "HR, I need Vanessa Porter's termination letter prepared for immediate delivery after my mother's funeral." I had texted my human resources director during a brief moment away from the gathering. Cause: misconduct, including public disparagement of company founder. Effective immediately with no severance beyond what's legally required. The instruction to prepare immediate termination documentation was both legally sound, given Vanessa's documented misconduct, and strategically timed to coincide with the revelation of my ownership that would transform her mockery into career-ending mistake about insulting someone she believed was powerless, but who actually controlled her employment. "Termination letter ready," my HR director had responded within 30 minutes. "Legal has reviewed and confirmed that misconduct justifies immediate dismissal. Security protocols are in place for access revocation and company property recovery. We're prepared to execute as soon as you give the word." The confirmation that my company was prepared to immediately terminate Vanessa's employment for her misconduct was both professionally reassuring and personally satisfying, since her funeral mockery was about to have consequences that would permanently end her fashion industry career and establish accurate understanding of family power dynamics. But while I was planning Vanessa's termination, I was also processing genuine grief about my mother's passing and disappointment about her failure to recognize my business achievements during her lifetime, since her preferential treatment of Vanessa had contributed to the family dynamics that made this funeral mockery possible. I wish Mom had understood what I built, I thought, while reflecting on years of dismissal and minimization of my entrepreneurial success. She died believing that Vanessa's corporate position was more impressive than my founding a company that employed her favorite niece. She never knew that I had achieved more business success than anyone else in our family. The sadness about my mother's failure to recognize my achievements was both personally painful and practically irrelevant, since her preferential treatment of Vanessa had been based on limited understanding of business success rather than malicious intent to diminish my accomplishments. But it had still contributed to creating family dynamics where Vanessa felt comfortable publicly mocking me at a funeral. The funeral service proceeded with traditional mourning rituals and shared remembrances of Barbara's life, creating brief moments of family unity through shared grief that temporarily suspended the tensions and rivalries that characterized our normal relationships, but would return even more intensely once I revealed the truth about my business ownership and Vanessa's impending termination. The revelation that would permanently alter my family's understanding of business success and power dynamics began during the reception following my mother's funeral service, when I decided that Vanessa's public mockery of my fashion choices had created the appropriate moment for exposing the truth about my ownership of Porter & Associates and her complete dependence on my business success for her supposedly impressive career. "Everyone, I need to address something that happened before the service," I announced while family members were gathering for the reception meal. Vanessa made some comments about my funeral attire that require clarification and response. The formal tone of my announcement was creating immediate attention from relatives who had been chatting casually about funeral proceedings and shared memories of Barbara, suddenly understanding that something significant was about to be revealed that would change the dynamics of our family gathering. Vanessa suggested that my dress was a bargain from a discount store and that I couldn't afford quality funeral attire, I continued while pulling out my phone to display documentation that would support the revelations I was about to make. She also suggested that working in luxury fashion had taught her to recognize quality, and that my dress was probably polyester, trying to look like silk. The direct quotation of Vanessa's mocking comments was creating discomfort among family members who were beginning to sense that their participation in ridiculing my fashion sense might have been based on inaccurate assessments of my financial situation and fashion expertise. "I want to clarify a few facts about this dress and about my relationship to the luxury fashion industry," I said while displaying my phone screen showing the Porter & Associates website featuring my morning dress from their current collection. "This dress is from Porter & Associates Atelier's Memento collection, custom-tailored to my measurements by 3 master seamstresses over 200 hours of work. The revelation that my supposedly cheap dress was actually from the luxury brand where Vanessa worked was creating immediate confusion among family members who were trying to reconcile Vanessa's assessment of my fashion sense with the apparent contradiction of my wearing pieces from the prestigious company she represented. "The retail value of this dress is $31,500. I continued with specific pricing information that was creating audible gasps from relatives who were suddenly understanding that they had been mocking funeral attire that cost more than many people's annual salaries. It's made from Italian silk crepe that costs over $800 per yard, with hand-finished details and custom embroidery that represents the highest level of artisan craftsmanship in contemporary luxury fashion. The detailed description of my dress's technical specifications and pricing was transforming family members' understanding of my financial situation and fashion expertise, creating growing discomfort as they realized that their mockery had been based on completely inaccurate assessments of my wardrobe quality and personal wealth. "But the most important clarification," I said while transitioning to the revelation that would permanently alter Vanessa's career and our family's understanding of business success, "is about my relationship to Porter & Associates Atelier, the company where Vanessa works and has built her supposedly impressive career." The emphasis on Vanessa's relationship to the company was creating obvious anxiety for her as she began to sense that something more significant than dress pricing was about to be revealed, though she still had no understanding of the full scope of what I was preparing to expose. "I founded Porter & Associates 12 years ago," I announced with simple declarative statement that was creating immediate shock among family members who were suddenly understanding that the small clothing business they had dismissed for years was actually the prestigious luxury brand they had been praising Vanessa for working at. "I own the company through a holding company structure that maintains founder privacy. Vanessa has been working for me for the past 5 years without knowing that her younger cousin is her ultimate employer." The revelation that I owned the company was creating stunned silence as family members processed the implications of this information and began to understand how completely they had misunderstood the power dynamics in our family, praising Vanessa for working at a company I had built while dismissing my entrepreneurial success as less impressive than her corporate employment. Have you ever watched people realize that the person they've been mocking actually owns the company that employs the person they've been praising? That's exactly what was happening as my family understood that I had been the most successful porter all along, building the fashion empire that gave Vanessa the corporate position she had used to establish her supposed superiority over my business achievements. Here's the corporate registration showing Porter & Associates Atelier was founded by Lillian M. Porter through LMP Holdings, I said, while displaying documents on my phone that proved my ownership claims. Here's the founding contract with my business partner Marcus Chen establishing our partnership structure. Here are financial statements showing that the company generated $47 million in revenue last year. The comprehensive documentation of my ownership and the company's financial success was creating irrefutable proof that I had built a fashion empire while my family had been dismissing my work as running a small clothing business that couldn't compare to Vanessa's supposedly impressive corporate position. Vanessa's salary and position have been funded by my business success for 5 years. I continued with accuracy about the financial relationship that had been obscured by corporate structures. While she's been mocking my fashion sense and business acumen, she's been depending entirely on the company I founded for her career stability and professional reputation. The explicit connection between my entrepreneurial success and Vanessa's employment was transforming family members' understanding of who deserved recognition for fashion industry achievement, since Vanessa's corporate position was now revealed as dependent on my business leadership rather than representing her individual accomplishment. I've worked for that company for 5 years. Vanessa finally spoke with obvious shock and growing panic. How could you own it without me knowing? Why didn't anyone tell me I was working for my cousin's company? The questions about how I could own the company without her knowledge were both irrelevant to the immediate situation and revealing about her failure to understand corporate structures and ownership privacy, since many luxury brands maintain founder anonymity through holding companies and corporate entities. I maintain ownership privacy through corporate structures? I replied with factual explanation. Porter & Associates founder identity has never been publicly disclosed, and employees have no automatic right to know who owns the company they work for. You've been working for me the entire time without knowing it. The explanation about corporate privacy was both legally accurate and personally satisfying, since it established that Vanessa's ignorance about my ownership had been due to legitimate business practices rather than any deception or concealment that required explanation or justification. But more importantly, I continued while transitioning to the employment consequences that Vanessa's funeral mockery had created, your behavior today at my mother's funeral has created serious professional misconduct issues that require immediate response from human resources. The reference to HR involvement was creating obvious terror in Vanessa's expression, as she began to understand that her funeral mockery might have employment consequences beyond just social embarrassment about having insulted her employer. Employees who publicly disparage the company founder at family funerals create liability issues that require immediate termination, I explained, while pulling up the termination letter that my HR director had prepared. Your mockery of my fashion choices while I was wearing a piece from our own collection, combined with your suggestions that I couldn't afford quality clothing, demonstrates such poor judgment that continuing your employment would create reputational risks for Porter & Associates. The explanation of termination grounds was both professionally appropriate and personally devastating for Vanessa, as she understood that her funeral mockery was going to cost her the career she had built at my company. You're firing me? Vanessa asked with disbelief about the immediate consequences of her misconduct. At my aunt's funeral? Because I made comments about your dress. I'm terminating your employment for cause due to serious misconduct, including public disparagement of the company founder during a family event. I corrected with legal accuracy about the termination grounds. Your behavior today demonstrated character and judgment issues that make you unsuitable for continuing to represent Porter & Associates in any capacity. The formal language about termination for cause was both legally necessary and strategically valuable for establishing that Vanessa's dismissal was based on documented misconduct, rather than personal revenge or emotional reaction to her mockery. This termination letter from HR is effective immediately, I said, while showing the document on my phone. Your access to company systems has been revoked, and security will collect your company property tomorrow morning. You'll receive final pay according to legal requirements, but no severance beyond what's mandated by law. The comprehensive termination procedure was both professionally executed and personally satisfying, since Vanessa was learning that the bargain dress she had mocked represented my authority to end her career with a single HR directive. "This can't be legal," Vanessa protested, while looking to other family members for support that wasn't forthcoming now that they understood the power dynamics at play. "You can't fire someone just because they criticized your clothing at a personal event. I can terminate an at-will employee for cause when their behavior creates liability for the company," I replied with legal accuracy about employment rights. "Your public mockery of my fashion sense while I was wearing a $31,500 piece from our own collection demonstrates such poor judgment that it justifies immediate dismissal regardless of your tenure or position." The legal explanation for termination was both professionally sound and personally devastating for Vanessa, as she understood that her funeral mockery had destroyed the career she had spent 5 years building at a company she hadn't known was owned by the cousin she had been insulting. The immediate aftermath of revealing my ownership and terminating Vanessa's employment was creating chaos among family members who were processing multiple layers of revelation about business success, power dynamics, and the consequences of mocking someone while unknowingly depending on them for employment stability. "Lillian owns Porter and Associates?" Cousin Jennifer asked with obvious shock about the revelation. "The same company we've been praising Vanessa for working at? The company Barbara always talked about as proof of Vanessa's career success?" The questions were articulating what many family members were thinking as they recalculated their understanding of who had achieved the most impressive business success in the Porter family, suddenly realizing that the person they had been dismissing had actually built the empire that employed their favored family member. "All these years, we thought Lillian was running a small clothing business while Vanessa had the impressive corporate career," Uncle Richard said, while processing the implications. "But Lillian founded and owns the company that gave Vanessa her position. We've been completely wrong about who was the successful one." The acknowledgement that family assessments of success had been completely inverted was both validating for me and embarrassing for relatives who had spent years praising Vanessa's corporate position, while dismissing my entrepreneurial achievements as less impressive than her employment at a company I had built. "I mocked Lillian's dress when it was from her own luxury fashion house," Vanessa said with growing horror about the full scope of her mistake. "I told the company founder that she was wearing cheap clothing from a discount store. I suggested she couldn't afford quality pieces from the brand I was supposed to be representing." The recognition of how thoroughly she had misjudged both the dress quality and the power dynamics was creating devastating understanding that her funeral mockery had been directed at someone who controlled her employment and could terminate her career with a single directive to human resources. "Vanessa's termination is going to destroy her reputation in the fashion industry," Aunt Margaret observed with accurate assessment of professional consequences. "Being fired from a prestigious luxury brand for insulting the founder is going to make her unemployable in fashion public relations. No other company will hire her after this." The prediction about Vanessa's career destruction was both professionally accurate and personally satisfying, since her mockery of my fashion sense at a funeral had revealed character issues that would make her unsuitable for representing any luxury brand, regardless of her previous experience or portfolio. "Why didn't you tell us you owned Porter and Associates?" Uncle Richard asked with confusion about my privacy choices. "Why let us spend years thinking Vanessa's career was more impressive than yours, when you had actually founded the company she worked for? I maintain ownership privacy for business reasons," I replied with explanation about my corporate strategy. "But more importantly, I wanted my success to be recognized on its own merits, rather than through revealing that I owned the company Vanessa worked for. I assumed my family would respect my entrepreneurial achievements without needing to know that I had built one of the most successful luxury fashion brands in the country." The explanation about wanting recognition for my actual business achievements rather than through competing with Vanessa was both emotionally honest and strategically challenging for family members who were realizing they had failed to appreciate my entrepreneurial success because they were too focused on praising Vanessa's corporate employment. "Barbara would have been so proud if she had known," several relatives said while reflecting on my late mother's failure to recognize my business achievements. "She died thinking Vanessa was the successful one, never knowing that Lillian had built the company that employed her favored niece." The observation about my mother's incomplete understanding of my success was both emotionally painful and practically irrelevant, since her preferential treatment of Vanessa had been based on limited understanding rather than malicious intent. But it had still contributed to family dynamics where I was consistently undervalued, while Vanessa was praised for achievements that were actually dependent on my business success. "I'm sorry," Vanessa said with what appeared to be genuine remorse about her funeral mockery. "I didn't know you owned the company. I wouldn't have made those comments if I had understood who you really were. The fact that you only regret your mockery because you now know I have power over your career is exactly why I'm terminating your employment," I replied with accuracy about character issues revealed by her selective remorse. "You should have respected me as a family member at a funeral, regardless of whether I owned your employer. Your apology that only comes after learning about my power demonstrates the same poor judgment that justifies your immediate dismissal." The explanation about why her belated apology was insufficient to prevent termination was both personally satisfying and professionally appropriate, since her funeral mockery had revealed character issues that extended beyond just ignorance about my company ownership to fundamental problems with judgment and respect during family bereavement. 3 months after my mother's funeral, and Vanessa's immediate termination from Porter & Associates, the consequences of her mockery had expanded beyond just losing her position at my company, to include comprehensive destruction of her fashion industry career, as word spread about why she had been fired from a prestigious luxury brand. Vanessa Porter was terminated from Porter & Associates for insulting the company founder at a family funeral. Fashion industry gossip had reported within weeks of her dismissal. She allegedly mocked the founder's clothing choices while unaware she was criticizing her own employer. The incident has made her unemployable in luxury fashion public relations. The industry-wide awareness of Vanessa's termination grounds was both professionally devastating for her and strategically valuable for my company, since it demonstrated that Porter & Associates maintained high standards for employee conduct and would terminate even long-tenured employees who demonstrated poor judgment or lack of professional ethics. No fashion brand will hire someone who insulted their previous employer at a funeral, recruitment firms told Vanessa when she attempted to find new employment. The story has spread throughout the industry, and your reputation is permanently damaged. You'll need to find work in a completely different field. The assessment that Vanessa needed to leave fashion entirely was both accurate and terminal for the career she had spent 5 years building at my company, since her funeral mockery had created a narrative about poor judgment that made her unsuitable for representing any luxury brand, regardless of her previous experience or professional skills. "I lost everything because I didn't know Lillian owned the company," Vanessa had told mutual acquaintances who reported these conversations to me. "If someone had just told me she was the founder, I never would have made those comments at the funeral. It's unfair that my entire career was destroyed because of one mistake." The characterization of her funeral mockery as one mistake that was somehow unfair to punish was both factually inaccurate and strategically revealing about her continued failure to understand that insulting someone at a funeral was wrong, regardless of whether that person owned your employer. Since basic human decency and family respect should have prevented her mockery even without knowledge of my business ownership. But while Vanessa was experiencing career destruction and professional exile from fashion industry, Porter & Associates was continuing to thrive and expand as my anonymous ownership remained protected, while the brand's reputation was enhanced by demonstrated willingness to terminate employees who failed to meet our ethical standards, regardless of their position or tenure. Porter & Associates maintains the highest standards for employee conduct. Fashion media had reported about Vanessa's termination. The company's founder, whose identity remains private, terminated a senior public relations manager for misconduct that included inappropriate behavior during a family event. This demonstrates the brand's commitment to ethics and professionalism that extends beyond just product quality. The positive media coverage about our ethical standards and termination of misconduct was both professionally valuable for company reputation and personally satisfying for me as the founder, since my decision to fire Vanessa had been vindicated by industry recognition that we maintained integrity standards that justified immediate dismissal of employees who demonstrated poor judgment. "Lillian, Your company has become even more prestigious since the Vanessa incident, Marcus told me during our quarterly business review. Clients and industry professionals respect brands that maintain high ethical standards and aren't afraid to fire employees who fail to meet those standards regardless of their position or connections. The observation that Vanessa's termination had actually enhanced our brand reputation was both professionally gratifying and strategically valuable, since it demonstrated that my decision to fire my cousin at my mother's funeral had been correct business judgment rather than emotional overreaction to personal insult. Your family situation must still be difficult, Marcus continued with concern about the personal costs of my business decision. Firing your cousin and revealing your ownership to your family at a funeral probably damaged those relationships permanently. Some family relationships aren't worth maintaining, I replied with honesty about my evolving understanding of family obligations. If my family only respects my success when they understand I have power over their favored members, then those relationships were never based on genuine appreciation of my achievements. I'd rather be successful and respected professionally than maintain family relationships that require me to hide my accomplishments to avoid threatening their preferred hierarchies. The prioritization of professional success and authentic relationships over family dynamics that required minimizing my achievements was both emotionally healthy and practically liberating, since I no longer needed to maintain anonymous ownership to protect relatives' egos or prevent family conflicts about who deserved recognition for fashion industry success. If you're reading this and you've been dismissed by family members who praise someone else for working at a company you secretly own, please know that revealing your ownership and establishing accurate power dynamics is both professionally appropriate and personally liberating, even when it creates family conflict or requires terminating relatives who have been benefiting from your business success while insulting your achievements. Sometimes people who mock you at funerals while depending on you for their careers deserve to learn that lesson through immediate termination. And sometimes the most satisfying revenge is revealing that you've been holding all the power all along while they were ridiculing the person who controlled their employment. If this story resonated with your own experiences, please hit that subscribe button and share your experiences in the comments below. Have you ever been mocked by family members who didn't know you controlled their employment or livelihood? How did you handle relatives who praised others for working at companies you secretly owned? Your story might help someone else who's struggling with similar family dynamics and hidden business success. Thank you for joining me on this journey from family mockery through ownership revelation to career termination and professional vindication. Remember that your business achievements have real value, and family members who mock you at funerals while depending on your companies for their employment deserve the professional consequences that come from insulting the founder. See you in our next story here at Her Sweet Revenge.